going? Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ice Time. We dive into some big ideas around the NHL. I'm Mike Fink, and I'm pleased to be joined again. It's been a while. It's been since before the preseason, probably, by Anthony Mingioni. It covers all things Philadelphia Flyers for Hockey Hot Stove, and is part of Off the Post Radio. One of the part of that line. I guess he's on the wing. I don't know what position you play there, but it's great to have Anthony. Great to have you back. And how are you doing?
Doing okay. It's been it was holiday break was good, and now we're back in obviously into some games here. We're in an interesting spot of the season here as we're closing in on the Olympic break, and teams are shuffling their cards and seeing which ones they want to deal and which ones they want to keep. So we're gonna discuss that today.
It is funny. It is an interesting time of year because I actually brought you on because I was thinking, let's do an early trade deadline preview. Let's kind of get a landscape or a little outlook of what the trade deadline might look like down the road. It turns out that it's a good timing to have you on. We're recording this on Monday, Martin Luther King Day. So happy holiday to everyone who has off, including some of us here. But it, it's early. The trade deadline came early, it looks like, or I call it the second wave, or that soft trade deadline before the All-Star and Olympic break that players are going to be off for. And we already had two trades this weekend. One trade happened, I think, a few minutes before I even started recording. Anthony, you told me about it. So we'll just get our quick thoughts on both these trades. The first one is Rasmus Andersson goes from Calgary to Vegas. Vegas sends back, they send back Zach Whitecloud, a prospect, and a few picks. And then the other one is Kiefer Sherwood goes to the Sharks. He was a big name off the board, another big name off the board. He goes from Vancouver to the Sharks, and he goes for two second round selections and also like a bunch of future assets. Let's start with the Rasmus Andersson one. We've had more time to chew on because it happened on Sunday, and now it's Monday as we record. So we kind of have some thoughts, but just your quick thoughts. Any thoughts on those on from the Flame side, the Vegas side, or just anything in general from those
So,
teams?
I think we obviously want to start off obviously from Vegas's side of this deal, and for me, in looking at the trade, um, Vegas is always sort of willing, using that card analogy that we just used at there at the beginning. They're always willing to put the, to take a risk and acquire, a potential pending free agent. They've done it in the past. Noah Hannifan's a perfect example of that, and other moves that they've made. I also got to look the other day. There was this list of how Vegas has just, if you think the Los Angeles Rams, discard draft pick like nobody's
Mm-hmm.
business. Vegas uses their first round pick almost all the time. I think Trevor Connolly is their only recent actual first round pick that they've taken, one of their prospects. So, they go in, they obviously they don't have they've got a good defense, but obviously missing Alex Petrangelo, who was obviously an absolute workhorse for them when they won the cup. But they don't have sort of a guy who you would say is that they've got a good defense, but not necessarily one where you go, there's a bona fide number one defenseman. Anderson's probably the closest thing that you could probably get for them in this circumstance, and there is obviously risk involved in making the trade because you do send Whitecloud, who I think is an excellent top four defenseman in this case, a perfect. He's under a long-term contract with Vegas, so him going to Calgary, he'll be a part of Calgary's attempt to begin to transition from his age 29 through his age. I think I got to check what his contract is, his early 30s, let's just say.
Well, with
And then the other
White Cloud is 24, I believe. So it's like actually he's a young defenseman who can.
I'm
There's
sorry,
Zach.
the age on that, I got that wrong. I'm sorry. Anderson's 20.
Yeah.
White Cloud's 24. I'm reading it wrong. I apologize. Yeah, he's 24. I'm sorry. So now they get White Cloud, and he could be a big part of their future going forward in this case. I'm getting my guys together here in terms of this, but Anderson obviously is 29, so apologies on that. So for Vegas in this case, that's the key for them, is a guy that can be a sponge for those kind of minutes, can be good offense, has a decent, good two-way profile, although some of his numbers haven't been particularly great. Some of his advanced stats numbers this year hasn't been great. Some of that, though, can be team affected too, because Calgary's obviously struggled this year. But he's been a guy that a lot of teams have wanted. Boston, I know, was certainly sniffing around that. We heard Dallas previously with that as well. So you have to wonder now, you know, what's the counter move potentially for, like, say, the Dallas Stars in this case? They're looking to potentially upgrade on their blue line. So again, from that circumstance, I think Vegas. My gut is Anderson will probably sign there. I have a gut feeling that, while he'll certainly the market open, Vegas is always one of those teams. They have a spot, and it's a a loaded team. They have a lot of offensive firepower. Um, and again, goaltending may be the one area where you kind of worry a little bit about them in terms of this. And Aiden Hill obviously backstopped them to a cup, but he's been more of a journeyman most of his career than he's been than a star goaltender in this case. What happens with Carter Hart, we just don't know. Obviously with his injury as well. So Vegas is an interesting team, but I could easily see him staying there and staying there. But from Calgary's perspective, again, White Cloud's certainly a defenseman they can build for the obviously be a building block for the future. And like, obviously the assets they got in return. Some people might have been somewhat underwhelmed, but again, in that what Cal got in return. But again, this was the case where other teams were like, well, we're only going to do it if we can get Rasmus signed to an extension. And Vegas is one of those teams that can just be like, no, we'll do it without an extension here, and because we'll take, because their belief, and rightfully so, is we'll probably get him signed, but we don't necessarily need to have that guaranteed ironclad. We're going to sign you right now situation. And I think that's good probably because I think Anderson probably is looking at this not unlike Mikko Rantanen in this circumstance. He kind of wanted to direct where he wanted to go, and Rantanen in his case ended up going to Carolina, and then obviously got traded to Dallas, into a market that he really wanted to go to that fit him better. So Anderson will get to see how the feel will be in Vegas, and he'll get the opportunity to be able to, get in some postseason hockey again, which I think is certainly important to him.
It's interesting. I think with Vegas, it's that I'm not actually so intrigued by the Vegas side. Yeah, they're going all in. They do this is what they do. They generally they push
Hmm.
the chips into the middle, and it's interesting because
Yeah.
he's not a clear cut number one, but they have a bunch of people who they kind of rotate in that number one mix. You have Hannafin, you have Shea Theodore, you have some of these players that they're not number ones, but they can kind of rotate between three or four defensemen. That's their group. The Flames fascinate me because of this. This is why I'm fascinated by the Flames. Is they got Zach Whitecloud, great young defenseman, a good plug in. You could plug him in, have him for the future on your blue line. They get a prospect who's also a defenseman to build around in the future.
Yeah.
At some point, this team needs to get forwards. They're not getting them. The fact that they didn't get them in this trade, you look at some of the trades they've made, they're getting good defensemen back. They have a good defense and they have a great goaltender. I don't
Yeah.
think you need to keep adding there. I mean, they did again, and maybe they when you're looking at some of the trades that they might do down the road, maybe they're going to keep adding blue liners,
Yeah.
but at some point you need to add forwards. And I just wonder when they're going to make those trades or how they couldn't get one in this deal where you just need someone to be just a reliable piece. Like even even if he's not a top six elite scorer, just have them plug and play in the middle six because they just need young talent in their forward
They
group and they
do.
don't have
But I think when you add a White Cloud to the mix in this case, I still feel like we're where you're at, if you're Calgary, is it's not necessarily moves you have to make like immediately. It's something that is they know where they're at right now. They'll get to the off season and they will make those, they'll try to make those evaluations. You never know. It could be something that happens prior to the actual deadline in this circumstance where they end up making a move. But again, it just doesn't seem like those offers were out there for those kind of play for that kind of return. So you in their circumstance, you're going to lose them as a UFA. Some of those assets that you acquire might be able to be used. I think you keep White Cloud, obviously, core for the future. And it also sounds like White Cloud's very excited about going to Calgary as well because he knows he's going to be obviously in a feature role there even more than he was in Vegas. So I look at it as, it's part of the steps, part of the process of rebuilding. And again, if you're trying to make trades, you want to get something. If you know you're going to lose a guy, you got to get something for him before you lose him for nothing. So you take what you get and you figure those other parts of your building plan as you go on down the line.
I think it's the dilemma, really the dilemma in team building in general is do you take the best players? Do you take the best offer or do you take what you need? And they're so far taking the best offers available and they're not necessarily taking it for need. You look at some teams when they draft, when the okay, we could take a center, but who's the best player on the board, or you could
Yeah.
take whatever you do. You want to take the best player on the board, or do you want to take what you need? And sometimes when you keep doing that, you end up building up these needs that you need to
And
address
Calgary
eventually.
and Calgary's also going to be in range. Obviously, I think they're going to be a team that's probably going to be in the top five, top 10 of the draft this year. I think, there's some pretty good forward talent that might translate. I mean, if they get lucky, they hit the lottery. Gavin McKenna might be one of those kind of players that, that they may end up taking.
Although I think it's interesting because here that's the other part to this where you talk about going back to the summer for them. This is just one more quick thing I'll throw out there is
Mhm.
that Calgary, like Winnipeg, is in a spot where you know you're not the top team for free agents.
Mhm.
Well, I don't want to say they're the opposite of destination Calgary. I'm sure it's a great city. I actually haven't
Yeah.
been there, but I'm sure it's a great city. And I'm sure there are players who want to play there. But again, like Winnipeg, when you're not going to sign those top players per se, it limits what you can do. And one
Yeah.
of the few ways you can build is by making these trades.
Mhm.
And eventually that's why I think maybe this is the best offer and you do take the best offer. I don't
Yeah.
want to discredit them for that, but I think eventually you do need a whether they're trading Blake Coleman, maybe they trade Nazem Kadri down the road. You have to get those type of building blocks at your forward group,
Yeah.
and you can't just build through the draft because the draft it just takes too long,
It's
and
not no
you can
from
only
a
do one.
long term perspective, yeah. But you have to. But a lot of teams are also jockeying for that talent too. The hope is that if you do deal, let's say a cadre in this case, to a contending team, that they have a younger forward that you could plug into your middle six and make it work. And Calgary, I know last year, obviously, with their trade with Philadelphia, when they acquired obviously Frost and Farabee, they were kind of hoping to get this middle six, consistent middle six play that they were hoping for. And it hasn't exactly quite turned out the way they had hoped going into this season, but those are still some young players that could be connective tissue to the rest of your lineup. But you need higher ceiling guys if you can.
Yeah, I mean that's the other thing. They get stars, your options are again like yeah, to get star players, your options are limited. So if they could
Mhm.
get the best player on the board, that's the way to do it. Kiefer Sherwood to the Sharks. I feel like yeah, we spent a lot of time on Rasmus
Mhm.
Andersson just now.
We
I
did.
mean, we have a lot of thoughts on that. So I'll throw out my thoughts on Sherwood just because I think I mean, this is just like processing it in real time. It feels like where he goes back for basically second round picks. Is I'm a little surprised at the return that it was this low for the Canucks, considering he was one of the top players on the trade market in terms of rentals. That I know, yeah, it's the rental, so you don't know if you're going to extend him or not. So I just that part is a little surprising that it was a low return. That I thought they could have gotten a first round pick or they could have gotten a top prospect in return. I thought that could have happened. And I think the other thing, and I'll just throw this out from the Sharks' perspective, is whether they think, okay, we're ready to contend now, and maybe that they with Sherwood think they can extend him and keep him around because they have a good core now with Celebrini, Will Smith. Michael Meese is on his way, but he's not there yet. But even so, you have the players in place. Now it's about adding those pieces and getting Sherwood. Maybe you're building around that. Those are just my two quick thoughts. Like just right off the bat, I'm like, okay, the Sharks think they're ahead of schedule. Do they want to rush things? Do they want to rush their rebuild? I don't know, but they think they are, and they're ready to make that push. And they're in playoff position or they're close to it, so
They are.
it's a good time to do it. And then the other part, yeah, the Canucks. I'm a little surprised about the return. So your thoughts?
Yes and no. Here's the thing: is that Sherwood started off the season like a house of fire, and yes, his goal scoring pace this year is far above. He's almost 2 goals off. He's only 2 goals off, I think, his career high in the NHL. I think he had 19 previously. That was his high, and at 44 games, and that's impressive. That being said, 6 assists, 23 points. Obviously, team effect when you look at his plus minus at minus 12. I'm kind of disregarding that because I think on a better team, that number is certainly better. Um, my thing is though, is that, he's kind of the flavor of the season. And when there's not a big market out there of guys that are going to be available in this case, you think maybe you would get a first round pick. I think if that trade happened potentially earlier in the season, maybe that first round pick is gotten, but I think teams have gotten a look on him now for a little bit longer. they're like, yeah, we think he can help us, but he's not worth a potential premium asset as a for a first round pick. I think that's really where things came down to. And maybe the market on him cooled a little bit. Maybe I'm feeling. I think maybe early in the year that he was definitely the name du jour, and we knew he was going to get moved. But in some ways, him getting moved now, it feels to me like the Canucks just said this is as good as we're going to get right now. I think for Kiefer Sherwood. Maybe there's someone else that gets more desperate at the deadline, but I think he has plateaued somewhat compared to where he was at really early in the early months of the season.
It seems like he was the player that there was the biggest disconnect between fans and talent evaluators.
Yes.
Where us kind of, I mean, hockey fans who watch the highlights or they see the stats and they see he's got a lot of goals. They think, okay, he's a goal scorer at the deadline. Teams need goal scorers. They want to make that move. And the people who watch him play, there's a little bit of this underwhelming where they're like, okay, we're not as high on him. You see this all the time at every level where people who are scouting the game or people watch them in person will say, okay, he's just having a good year or he's a good goal scorer now, but he's not the type of
And
player.
it's a contract here, so
Yeah.
you're gonna get the absolute best version of Kiefer Sherwood. So then you have to ask yourself then if he's kind of plateaued, he's at 17, but he's kind of plateaued. The other teams have to project forward and saying, okay, what will he be if we end up signing him? And again, to me, the trade is very much when you're trading 2 seconds, it's a rent. It still reads to me as a rental, as in I think he could very well be going out, and if he may not necessarily stay in San Jose per se. Although I think much like I see Andersson landing in San Jose as a good fit for the long term if he chooses to stay there. Sherwood is also a player that when you look at San Jose's lineup, his style, I think, is something that I think we're San Jose is looking at and saying, if we're going to get into the postseason, we're going to need a player who is going to be he likes the forecheck. I mean, like I said, I had a chance to watch him in person this year when Vancouver was in Philadelphia. I'm watching him going, yeah, he hits everything that moves. He gets himself to the dirty areas of the ice, the middle of the ice where everybody wants. So San Jose may look and say he could potentially be a power play weapon for him because he's one of those guys that will be willing to go to the middle, which is what every team is always looking for if they're trying to have an effective power play. So, I can see him saying in San Jose, but I probably put less. I'm less certain on him staying there as I am with Andersson going to Vegas.
I think for San Jose's perspective, that's probably the other part is that they want to put their foot in the water.
Yeah,
I guess like the
those young
pool.
players, they need that. They're trying to get that experience for these young players. The
But it,
playoff push is not a bad thing, and then you kind of go, okay, we'll
but it,
see how far we ride with this thing. But the experience, I think, I don't underrate that experience. It's another reason why I think for everybody when you shift and people certainly for the market that I cover with the Flyers, everybody is
yeah.
wants the team to they go on a losing skid and everybody wants to strip everything down to the studs when they've got young players that really could use that postseason experience and get that taste.
But I think we're putting your foot in the water in the sense like they don't want to go all in. They don't want to start making a bunch of moves. They're like, well, try this out. It's not going to cost us a lot. It's only a few second round picks. We're going to make a move. And if it works out, we extend him. If not, we let him go. It didn't cost us much. It's one of those low risk
You
type
can
of
always get
trades
a
for them.
second round pick back in another trade. That's
Yeah.
the whole thing is if you really need to get in to the second round, you've traded away 2 seconds. Now again, it's still a decent high cost. It's still a decently high cost when you're trading a pair of seconds in this case. So I think the intention is San Jose does want to re-sign him. I think it's a case of let's see how he fits. And if let's say you put him next to Celebrini and the two of them click immediately and you see Sherwood suddenly, before we know it, mid 20s, high 20s in goals by the end of the season, playing on a wing with Celebrini. Um, that makes things, the players happy, and that's the case where San Jose goes, okay, we can start thinking about this as a more of a long-term partnership.
Yeah, but this definitely the fact that you didn't give up as much, it gives you time to watch it play out.
Hmm.
Knowing how we just said that, they might actually just extend him while we're recording this, but it's the fact that you give yourself this time where, okay, maybe we don't need to sign him yet. It didn't
Yeah.
cost us much, so we can wait it out. This is the San Jose perspective. And if it works out and it ends up being that he works out well with them, and they actually could sign him, knowing, okay, we have a building block, another player who's just going to be a part of this future that is already an exciting future, it's uh and it's only going to get better from there. I guess let's dive into. We already kind of did a bunch of trades, but I'll ask you a general. We're doing an early trade deadline preview, and it's kind of funny because we kind of did trade breakdowns already. So I'll just ask a general question, which I think we're getting an answer to it already, which is which teams do you already see as early sellers or already entering that sellers market? We mentioned the Canucks. Obviously, I mean, the Canucks and
Yeah,
Flames just sold,
teams
so I
that are.
really kind of circle them. But who do you see as the early sellers in the trade and already circling to make some trades?
It's going to be interesting to see. So if you take a look, I think I am beginning to wonder. The LA Kings are a team that I'm kind of keeping my eye on right now out west. I think Nashville's another team. I don't think Chicago's going to be making kind of any sales in this circumstance. I am curious about Winnipeg out west as well, if they're looking to shake things up since this has been such a monumentally disappointing year because of how bad, that just they're just haven't been very good on the road this year. In the East, obviously, we're all going to be waiting on what the Rangers do, even with them snapping their losing skid against Philadelphia. They are near the bottom. They are currently near the bottom of the conference right now. They are at the bottom of the conference, actually, in New Jersey. Again, the East is a weird animal here. It's like in this case, I almost see less selling in the East per se because things are still teams are within range. Because
Certainly
again,
less clarity, that's for
there's
sure.
just less clarity. So I just see, I think I see potentially some Eastern teams kind of trying to you know, make some additions prior to the deadline. I think the team that I cover, Philadelphia, again, I'm good. They're in an interesting spot now where again they initially when they make their 5-year contract with Christian
Dvorak.
Dvorak, the Flyers were in a pretty good spot. Now things have changed, but Briere also kind of kept things sort of close, just saying we're not like in necessarily in buyer's mode or acquiring rentals at the deadline. They're not there with that. So I just kind of look at it as Philly's still very much an open-ended question. I could see them selling. It's just what could they sell at the deadline is what's going to be very interesting.
You
I
have
do
those
think
middling teams
it may
right
be a
now.
case where they also may be looking also to acquire, like I said, their goalie situation is what it is right now. If Ladar's hurt, you do not have another goaltender right now that you can really count on at the moment. For all the brave talk with Sam Ersson, it's not happening. He's obviously struggling, and Kolosov, while he was good in the AHL, again, I still think he's too raw for this level yet. So, it could very well be a case of Philly might attempt. I could see Philly sniffing around a team like Buffalo and saying, "Hey, you guys got a bunch of goalies. Maybe a guy like that Levi would be a guy I think that Philly would be looking at for as a long-term potential backup in this case." But teams, like I said, teams are selling. It's mostly Western Conference teams that I think are likely going to be in trouble. LA is an interesting one. I know early in the season, before he became the assistant general manager in Columbus under Kekalainen, we saw a lot of Mark Bergevin, who was in the press box a bit, scouting, and it was like 4, 5, 6 games in a row. I do wonder if Philly and LA have had conversations with one another about potentially, if LA's got something that maybe works long term and Philly has something that might help LA is with their playoff push. I could see business being done there if, especially if LA's looking at something that fits Philadelphia for the long term. Probably at the forward position in this case, maybe defense, but probably more likely at forward. But those are the teams I'm kind of looking at the moment right now. A lot of the Western teams, I feel like them are in trouble. Are the ones that are the ones I'm looking at. Winnipeg's going to be fascinating. I think if they start
Yeah.
selling guys off, that's going to be really interesting to see what
it,
happens there.
it seems like we're getting our suspects. We just don't know. There's some teams in the middle that we're going to really find out. That's why this trade deadline period, where this second
Mm-hmm.
wave before the Olympic break, is where you can see some teams that we already know about
Mm-hmm.
selling, and then when you get to the trade deadline, we'll actually have more clarity on, especially the Eastern Conference, just all
Especially
clustered
once we
together.
come out of the, again, as we've said before, when we come out of the Olympic break, I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of conversations that go on over the break, and certain teams are going to want to get that business done. And the pattern has been in recent years with the trade deadline has been the big business gets done in advance, and then it's the little tweaks, but then you get the shockers at the very end. You get the Marchand trades, for example,
Yeah.
that surprise you out of nowhere right at the buzzer. So it'll be interesting to see for sure, Mike.
No, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see which teams go where, but where they go. But yeah, we're already starting to see our early suspects, which I think is a
New
little
York is going to be like the
fascinating.
Rangers again. Panarin. Panarin's going to get moved. We know that. Zibanejad, I'm not sure is going to get moved.
My
I
early suspects are, I just list them here. It's Rangers, Canucks,
Mhm.
Flames, and Blues. You already know those teams are selling. It's
Yes.
the question is
The
what teams come
degree
in.
of the selling too is a question. I mean, I know especially with St. Louis, there's been talk. I know you obviously covered it on Hockey Hot Stove when you were talking about, you know,
Jordan
Jordan
Kyrou,
Kyrou is one
yeah,
possibility. If Philly would be looking at him, for the long term. It depends on how Philly looks at Jordan Kyrou. Just because they've acquired his brother doesn't necessarily. I don't know if that necessarily means that's the lead into getting Jordan. Robert Thomas would be an interesting guy if St. Louis actually really is looking to
yeah.
completely change things. That would be a big move, and
He's the one the Flyers want because he's a center and he's
that's
got
the thing. If they're trying to they're looking at the next draft or two, and they're looking at the offseason, just going, the center situation is just not that good. And if a center might be available, we've got to be on the horn with other teams and be if center position is something that you don't think is going to be, you've already drafted some centers already, but they're not going to be ready for a bit. Luchenko, we'll see. You have to remember Luchenko was young for his age for the draft, so I'm kind of still in a patient wait and see mode. Obviously Nesbitt they love as well. I don't see either of those guys getting moved, but Berglund's an interesting prospect as well. But again, how do they profile? Are they true guys where you go like a Robert Thomas, who is absolutely locked down a top six center, and that's something with true top six talent that Philly could really use because they don't really their center situation. Philly is so. I basically say they have a very workmanlike group. They've got three centers that are Couturier at this point of his career, third line center at best. I mean, I think he's a high level, good third line center, but you know things things are not things are not trending. I think in a great direction with him long term. And Dvorak's Dvorak. He's connective tissue for a lineup, a good transition guy who can sometimes play higher in the lineup, but a lot of times projects lower than that. And Noah Cates is, he's kind of like in that second, third line center, but again,
they don't have a clear number one,
they
so
don't have a clear
that's what
number
makes
or what I would call as a true talent top six, top two line center where you go, that's a guy you can kind of hang your hat on for offensive numbers.
yeah, that's what's interesting about the Flyers part of this whole thing.
Yeah.
All right, we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back.